we don't get to know each other, you know. So we only have little time for me to ask if everyone's okay, if you have questions. It's not a real relationship, you know. Sounds like platitudes, you know, just things that you say. But I am concerned. I do care about you, your practice. The center is not fully open, so just partially. So we don't have too many nights. I usually come just one evening per week. Tuesday evening, loving kindness. I try to have my students have opportunity to teach. And I'm in the rotation. But sometimes things come up and I can't come. So once a month I'm here on Tuesday as well. Until we get to a full schedule, and there'll be more opportunities to see each other, and I'm here almost every evening. But in the meantime, if you do have questions, feel free to ask. Do you have questions from your practice? Yes, Tom, please.
I'm coming back to the question I asked. You know, I like the answer you gave. You said, continue practice. I think that's a good answer.
What was the question?
You know, what to do when you have, for example, after 3 or 4 hours close, getting into a samadhi state or to being of enlightenment.
Sarah, you want to give him the mic?
The question I asked you last week, what should we do when we have the feeling we are close to kind of, you know, opening a door, or so maybe state of samadhi, or you know, feeling of enlightenment or whatever. And you said, yeah, just practice. And I think this is an excellent answer. But maybe that's an answer that applies to almost everyone. You can be a beginner, you can be enlightenment or so, and you would probably recommend, yeah, practice, right? I was wondering whether, you know, there's a specific practice depending on where people are.
Yeah. Okay. So since we have a mic, I don't have to repeat. Yes, answers such as, you know, whatever people may experience, an answer like, just continue to practice. Seems like it's a good answer for every question. It's like a one pill that takes care of everything. But it's not like that. Buddhadharma is not like that. It's not like a one-trick pony. You know. So different people, they come to the practice experiencing different things. They bring with them their baggage. So sometimes the teacher needs to identify them, you know, and address the specificities. Yet, everything depends on relationship. What I mean by that is the connection between teacher and student, or two people. Just practice. These words are embedded in that relationship. So, when other people hear, they may hear the same answer. But the receiver of that answer, they hear it differently in that time. For example, there's a story, a Chan story. I forget it was Yunmen or Zhao Zhou. Probably Yunmen, something that Yunmen would do. So a student came from afar, asked for to be accepted into the assembly, the monastery. And Yunmen asked, it was close to midday or sometime after. Yunmen says, "Have you eaten yet?" And the student answered, "I've already had my fill." And Yunmen replied, "Go have some tea then." Okay? So the attendant was sitting there, standing there. The next person comes. These are new visiting practitioners. So Yunmen asked him the same question. "Have you eaten yet?" And the student says, "No, I've not." So, "Go have some tea then." And it seems like the same answer, but the relationship's different. It seems like the context is even the same, but the dynamic between the two people is different. One person may have heard the question from may have heard the question deeply. "Have you eaten yet?" The second person may have heard the question, like literally, "Have you eaten yet?" No, I haven't." Well, the meal is over. Just go have some tea then. So the attendant was confused. It's almost like your question. Right? Like, yes, that seems like the answer for everything, but is there something else or specific you can address? So the attendant says to the teacher, the first person clearly is a practitioner. You told him to have some tea. Second person, you told him to have some tea too. But isn't, like, why? The implication is, isn't there something specific? And the master looked at him and says, "Go have some tea." So sometimes there are circumstances like that. So the teacher picks up on that chemistry, that relationship, the connection, and the context. And as long as the teacher has no clutter, here, as long as nothing's in the way, the teacher will reflect on what needs to be said. Sometimes it's like that. So Buddhadharma has no specific thing it wants to give to people. There's no fixed teaching. But if you ask the question, having known you, and I said, just continue practice. It's a kind of affirmation. It's a kind of encouragement. People come to me, different things. I may say, just continue practice, or I may address something specific. I know my answer is complicated. It's not simple answer. Superficially, if I were to summarize, continue practice. It's a general rule. That applies to everyone, including teachers. And sometimes teacher would say this, sometimes not. That would be like the second point. The third point would be, why would certain things be said and certain things not said or said differently? It's because of the relationship. There's a lot that's happening all the time. Do you know? There's a lot that's happening. So even in conventional worldly understanding, secular understanding, we understand that, when we are with someone, there's a lot of things that the mind or the brain picks up pre-conceptually. Did you all know that? Conceptual means like fully formed notion and idea. Before that, we already have picked up a lot of information. This is like neuroscience. They tell us that. The process is called interoception. It's a predictive. So the mind is constantly assessing, assimilating things, right? Before you even have an idea. Same thing with people. When you're in the presence of someone, there's a lot of information that's going on there. So the teacher, when the mind is quiet, actually sees that process to some extent. Right? Not consciously. You could say just being present. But if a person's mind is very cloudy, a lot of things going on, we don't see anything. Does that make sense? Right. So it's like looking at a green apple. Sometimes I give this analogy. Looking at a green apple, right? Raise your hand if you had this experience. You look at a green apple, you take a bite, it's actually very sweet. You're kind of surprised, like, oh, it's green. Have you had this? Or you've tasted something, it's like, oh, astonished, like, oh, it tastes very good. Raise your hand if you had this. Why would you be surprised? Because of the interoceptive process, predictive process. Your neurological patterning based on the baggage that you bring. You already think, green, raw, must be a little bit sour. So when you taste it, actually, oh, it's not sour. Do you understand? We're constantly going through that. Right? But if our mind is very cluttered, we don't really, we don't know what's going on. We just go, oh, it's sweet, surprise, keep on going on. But the mind is constantly predicting, projecting, assessing with every situation that we meet. Move what? Is it creating noise? So, constantly. So a quiet mind, not a stagnant, dead mind, right? A quiet, clear mind, actually are in tune with what is actually happening and present to what is in the present. People can call that intuitive, but that's almost like a word for something that we don't really know what's going on, so we just call it intuitive. But actually, the mind is clear, right? And this mind is grounded, the body is grounded, so you can kind of sense what's happening, energy-wise, verbal-wise, visual, all the senses are open, provided that we don't have any sensory flaws, like our senses are actually working. So, right. So that's the context. Now the specificity of your question, just practice. Yeah. I may not say that to everyone. Right? When I say practice, you know what I mean. Right? If I say that to someone else, they may not know what I'm talking about. Practice what? Right? So it's like in the gateless barrier koan collection in my book, Passing Through the Gateless Barrier, there's a case in which the teacher always calls out his attendant's name. The attendants reply, yes. Yeah. It's like, Tom, yes. Tom, yes. Tom, yes. Right? Now normally, and in the comment, I say this, it's like a husband and a wife, they've been together for decades. You know. They look at each other, they don't even have to say anything. They look at each other, they know what's going on. It's kind of like that. Right? So context determines a lot of things. Anyone else have questions? You have one. Yeah. Okay, use the mic, please. Thank you.
My personal question is, what to do when your mind feels mired in it, mired in everything around you? When, obviously, you can change the circumstances and you can take steps to give your mind the chance to be quiet, but what do you do when you're in that moment, in that state?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a method. You have to have a method. If you're in the midst of the vortex, the swirling about of causes and conditions, you will be swept away. Unless you have a method. Yes? Okay? So it wasn't on? Oh, okay. Okay. Must have a method. Right? It's like a boat in the ocean, and the waves are high. It must have a compass. It must know how to steer. That, in a way, it's like practice. But in that context, you must have a method. You must have a method of practice. So something specific. So when the waves are high, it's very easy to be swept away. Right? Similarly, when we're mired in circumstances, changing conditions, different ups and downs, the energies are high, right? Or agitated. Right? When people are usually in that circumstances, in those circumstances, people's energies are high too. They're in the head. They're in the head. That means you have to bring their energy down. You have to. I don't mean meditation in the middle of chaos, right? But the principle of practice is very important. For example, you can instantaneously feel the soles of your feet. Mind has no form, so mind can be instantaneous. You want it to be there? It's right there. Feel the toes, the grabbing of the soles of your feet to the earth, right? At the ground. To prevent you from being swirled about by causes and conditions. So you have to have a very specific, very concrete, non-conceptual, tactile, grounded in the body. It just takes a moment or two of doing that, and from that you respond the best of your ability. Right? And the circumstances may be different. Yeah. So that's the general principle. Okay? Method, embodied. The method can't be, well, could be, but I don't teach it that way. The method can't be conceptual. The method can't be recitational. Mantra, recitation of some words, that's still up here. So the way I teach is method, down, grounded to earth. And from that, we respond. Okay. So, okay. Anyone else? Okay. Yes.
Other than love and kindness, what other states and expressions in one? Okay. Other than love and kindness, what other states and expression can one meditate on?
There's a lot of method. There's a lot of method besides loving kindness. Are you a visual type? Yeah. You can take a look at the sky. Right. Look at the sky. And you in it, in the space. You in it. Right. From the perspective of Florida, you're just a tiny speck of dust, a dot. That vast openness. And then from the perspective of southeast, smaller. North America, smaller. Earth. And just use your visual ability to just see the vast openness. And you in it. And then you discover that your vexations, whatever that may be, it may be. When we're in the vexations, everything's a big deal. It's life-changing and horrific. But from the perspective of the vast openness and the billions of people in humanity, comparatively speaking, little tiny vexations. See? So you immediately step outside of just, this. Yeah? So I taught different things. Yeah. One is simple, it's practice. Two, I tell him to be embodied. With you, I tell you to not go to your body. Open. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. Yes. Pass the baton. Have to turn it on.
You were describing the precognition when you were answering the question for Tom. How, when you are in that moment and in a conversation and you How do you discern from that clarity and the feeling from ego and self-importance imprinting what your opinion might be on, when you feel it,
Yeah.
how do you discern if it's really clarity or if it's noise?
Okay, that's a good question. But it's a question. It's a kind of. It's a good question, but it's a question from the perspective of the ego, right? Because the clarity. So practitioners, us practitioners. So much of our practice is to concretely work with ourselves, our mind, to come to know the patterns and so on. This is what we call vexations. So if the practitioner cannot discern what is present, then it's really not a Buddhist practitioner. So the clarity is different than the worldly convention of clarity. Worldly convention of clarity means my thinking pattern is clean, crisp, I'm lucid, and maybe it has tints of intelligence. So that's not the clarity, and that's why it's a great question, because that's not the clarity in Dharma practice. Dharma practice, clarity is whether the self is present or not, whether vexation, greed, hatred, ignorance, and from that, all the things that's going on, arrogance, jealousy, all that, fear, so wanting, gaining, it's me, I, mine, So if a person cannot discern that, then we have to really examine what is it that we've been practicing. So being present means less here and more there. So being in tune with the person. Whatever the question is coming from or concern. That said, every one of us is limited, so that the practitioner may be, the self-referencing will be maybe small, diminished, but that person may only have limited resources in helping other people. So they can just, that's all they have. They have $2 here, that's what they can give, $2, right? So, it takes honesty, ruthless honesty, sincerity, to practice and to be present. Also, it takes courage, like fearless, meaning you don't try to protect yourself. You don't care. You're open. You're open book. So you are kind of vulnerable in that way. But vulnerable, not that you get hurt. The kind of openness, vulnerability, one doesn't get hurt. We get hurt when the self-referencing is there. So it's like, sometimes I give the analogy like a garbage can. Not that you guys are giving me garbage. I don't mean that. But in interview, a lot of people just come with all kinds of problems. If I hold on to them or put myself in the middle of them, then I would get very stressed. My energy would be drained, and I would get exhausted, and I would carry that. But it's more like a garbage can, bottomless. So things go here, it goes right out. It goes right out. You know? So sharing, so that kind of vulnerability is open, doesn't retain. And vigilance of that vexations that they're not. You know? Yeah. Yeah. So without that, that's the practice of Buddhadharma, you know, which is, like I said, the main portion of what we're doing actually is to expose vexations and come to really familiarize what is it and the patterns, and then learning to embrace that, not to accept and leave it alone. Embrace it means taking responsibility for it. You know, it's our doing. There's a history to why we are the way we are, right? And then working with it. That's practice. It's not really about like awakening, enlightenment we chase after. It's just sideshows, you know, like side products from the path of practice. Just, you know, and then these vexations, once we're able to expose, embrace, and work with them, we can diminish. Not allowing them to contaminate between the relationships that we have, you know. So that's practice. The clarity is understood in that context as opposed to just conventional. The person is very clear, lucid, very quick in response, and intelligent, or the person can have a very strong ego, very strong, you know. So it's totally different. Totally different. Okay. Good. So it's good that we have some interaction. Yeah. Suppose we're giving a talk. We got 15 minutes left. Don't worry, it's very quick. The following one. Let me read the passage. Roaring the Dharma thunders, beating the Dharma drum, gathering the clouds of kindness so the ambrosia is dispersed. Where the dragons and elephants tread, the benefits are boundless. And the three vehicles, the five natures, are all awakened. The peyote grass in the snow mountains is unadulterated. I often enjoy the pure ghee it produces. So this section actually relates to tonight's conversation. Roaring the Dharma thunder, beating the Dharma drum. These are parables from sutras for expounding the Dharma. Right? And also ambrosia, you know, beating the Dharma drum, so the ambrosia or the elixir, you know, elixir, kind of like the drink of the deathless. Right? It's able to allow a person to continue to flourish inexhaustibly. It's dispersed or distributed. Right? So he's talking about teaching. So remember, this whole section is about post-awakening. What does a practitioner do? Previously, we're talking about how he works on him or herself or themselves. This section is talking about, expounding the Dharma, teaching. And these parables are from sutras. For example, in ancient time, in the sutras, and it may not be right. This is just parables. Parables, metaphors are limited. So in ancient time, people thought that when the thunder roars, people anywhere all hear it. But that's not true, is it? For example, there's time zone difference, right? So we are over here, and people on the other side of the globe, they don't hear the thunder. It's very regional. It's very localized. People didn't know that. The Dharma drum, where Master Shen got the name from our Chan lineage, Dharma drum, come from Mahayana Sutra. There's a sutra called the Sutra of Dharma drum. But this metaphor exists in different texts. The Mahaparinirvana Sutra mentions it. The Lotus Sutra mentions it. So this is a myth in ancient India. Whenever one goes out in battle, the practice is such that there's an ancient kind of technology. They smear poison on the surface of the drum. So when you beat the drum, through the sympathetic resonance, your enemy, when they hear it, they're all poisoned and they collapse. So it's this mythic kind of legend of these great warriors and kings, how they go into battle. And the Buddha used that analogy. Instead of poison, smearing the drum with Dharma, right? With Buddhadharma. So when you beat the drum, when people hear it, their vexation just crumbles, right? So, and then the next line talks about gathering clouds of kindness out of love and compassion. So all these means the thunder roaring, right? The drum beating, and the clouds of kindness, of love, is able to distribute with the Dharma, benefiting all beings. I'll talk about the 3 vehicles and 5 natures in a moment. The implications of this, actually I want to talk about tonight, at least raise it. The implication of this is, and the Buddha in the Lotus Sutra has this analogy, another parable, describing the way he teaches. Like the rain pours down, but each plant receive accordingly to what it needs. And each plant, through the nourishment of the rain, it's able to grow to their own capacity. Right? So the implication here is the rain comes down equally. Equally. The difference lies in the receiver. And the Lotus Sutra also talks about the Buddha expound the Dharma in one sound, one voice, but the multitude of beings hear it in their own way. It sounds innocuous. It's a pretty good analogy, right? But it's only an analogy. That's as far as it goes. And it's privileging the equanimity, the non-discrimination of the Buddha. But from the perspective of the receiver, this is a poor analogy. I know it sounds like I'm criticizing the sutras, but I want to make a point. And that is, equality is different than equity. You all know that, right? It sounds like the same. What do you mean it's the same? The sutra is privileging, so it's a matter of perspectives. The sutra want to talk about the Buddha's compassion, equanimity, non-discrimination. I don't choose you over this other person. But from the receiver, actually the scriptures has other analogies. They don't use that analogy, the universal rain equally coming down. It is you who experience the differences. From other analogies, we see that when the light, spotlight, is shine on the receiver, the teaching is not about equality. The Buddhadharma always function from the perspective of equity, meaning this person needs this type of teaching, so the Buddha gave that teaching. That person, Bob, right? Yeah. Bob needs some other teaching. I'm not going to try to force down the same teaching like one trick pony. I only have this to teach. Just rain. Just keep on pouring. You see if you can get it, right? Bob may need more sunshine instead of rain. So the Buddha doesn't give any rain to Bob. He gives sunshine. Does that make sense? And this relates to how the Dharma circulates. How a teacher or any one of us relate to people, share the teachings that we have learned. Never be a fundamentalist. One trick pony. Have the same thing, the Buddhadharma, as if it's something fixed and try to shove it down people's throat. Always this reciprocity, open, receptive to what is needed. You're able to pick up what is actually needed and then respond accordingly. An analogy of the difference between equality and equity is this. Maybe two kids. Two kids. Here's a good analogy. How many of you like apples? Good. You don't like apples? Some. Not your favorite. What's your favorite fruit? Berries, wonderful. Just think of apple as a big berry. Right? Berries, right? And it's on a hill. It's on a hill, right? The tree, berry tree, apple tree is growing on a hill. And there are all kinds of kids there of different height. And they're standing differently, right? If you're standing on the lower side of the hill, try to reach the tree. First of all, through photosynthesis, the sun is always over there, so the tree is growing maybe in one direction. So the kids that are actually standing over here, they can't reach the fruit. So equality is like, okay, I'm going to give everyone the same ladder universally, equally. But people standing on the other side, the ladder. Even with the ladder, they still can't reach the fruit. So the people on the other side, the lower side, maybe they're younger kids, and they're standing at different level, they need a taller ladder. Now you may think that's discrimination. That's not fair. But actually, from the perspective of the receiver, the goal is everyone get to eat the apple or berry, right? And they're able to benefit from it. They're able to be satiated by it. Satiate their hunger, right? So different people need different things. That's the difference between equality and equity. Everyone able to access the fruit. And because everyone need to access the fruit, different people need different things. Same thing with the Dharma. That's why I say we can't have like a one-trick pony. You know, just same thing over. Give to everyone. Right? Some people just need to say, continue practice. Other people have spent time talking about neurology, this and that. This one, you know, everyone is different, right? So that's how we relate to people. So in terms of relationship, because our practice and the sharing of the fruits from our practice always exists at very least from 3 perspectives. And you can take this, remember this, next time you relate to people. Right? Self, others, context. I say context determine things, right? Someone needs help. For example, if you need help, right? But why do you need help? Maybe you're becoming elderly and you can't think straight anymore. You can't make the right decisions anymore. So your friends are here to help you, right? But you still have your sense of autonomy, choice. How many of you know that the elderly, what is important for the elderly? Bingo. Independence and autonomy. Do you know why they want that? Bob, you want to shed some light? Why?
It's tied to their youth.
Tied to their youth, okay? Their very identity, they've been making their own choices, right? But when people get older, everyone wants to make choices for him. Everyone. Doesn't feel too good. And that's the thing that they're holding on to. There's one more thing that the elderly needs. Anyone? Tom?
Maybe. I think it's also relationships.
Relationships. Companion. So to be seen, right? To be heard, to be cared, loved, to be respected. And that reciprocity is very important. Because very often in this modern society, loneliness is something that the elderly often face. Through the I think it's 19th century invention of senior citizen homes. You put them all together, tuck it away, don't see it, you don't have to think about it. In former times, the elderly stay with the family. And it's wonderful because it's intergenerational. You have grandkids, so that it's very healthy for the brain of the elderly, interacting with kids. Two things: autonomy, friendship, connection. In that context of self, other context, a person A cannot think straight. They make wrong choices. They're vulnerable. People are taking advantage. Friends tend to, I'm going to come in here and do this, X, Y, and Z, help you. Everyone has good intentions, out of love, out of care. But that person doesn't feel too good. Why? You're making choices. Do I have a say in this? You're making choices for me? What? That person feel invaded. Love becomes aggressive. We're going to come in here, we're going to give you a dementia test, we're going to take away your card, we're going to do this, housing, let me take care of it, I'm going to call the sheriff to do this, to help you make sure you're settled, I'm going to move you to this. Very hurtful. So it depends on what we dynamically work in this context of self, context, and other. From the perspective of context, everything that's listed needs to be done. We need to have a test of it's correct way to do. We need to help manage the money because they don't know how to. People can take their money. They can give it away. Everything needs to be done. But in this dynamic relationship, the timing and what needs to be done in the moment without being perceived as aggressive, invasive, very important. Because once you lose that relationship, they will turn and demonize us who try to help, which is usually family. Sons, daughters, trying to put their dad into senior citizen. The relationship is ruined. So that skill, that wisdom of skillful means of how to relate to the person so that person come to the conclusion himself, herself, themselves that I think I need a test. That is wisdom. And that's compassion. You see, it's not to say nothing can't be done. All the list of things that needs to be done and shouldn't be done. It should be done. But that is the skillfulness of wisdom and compassion of the Buddha, of the awakened ones. Why? Because self is not there. When the self is absent, my own agenda, what I think is right, my ego, right, is not there. What is left? Other and context. The context may dictate, okay, you got a whole list of things we got to do, right? But the other is privileged too. So how to work that? That is the wondrous function of equity in the skillful means of wisdom and compassion. Very difficult to do. Recently, I tried to do it. And I made a big mistake helping someone. So what's left is other and context, right? I went for the context. Big mistake. Big mistake. Not big. We're on good terms now. But as soon as I sensed, not heard, the person, I'm not heard. I immediately dropped the context. Immediately shifted to, I'm here for you. Does that make sense? So, timing, skillfulness. That is how the next line. The dragons and elephants, it means awakened ones, right? People who are awakened, great wisdom. The real point here is the 3 vehicles and the 5 natures all realize awakening. What are the 3 vehicles and the 5 natures? Now we're talking about differences. Now we're talking about not the universal rain in the Lotus Sutra, pouring down all beings equally. We're talking about shrubs. We're talking about plants now. We're talking about great trees. What do they need? You see? The 3 vehicles refers to Pratyeka Buddha, Shravaka, Bodhisattva. Pratyeka Buddha means self-awakened ones. Very simply put, these are people who are loners. Loners. And they realize things by themselves through observation. Through observation and through their own practice. If you give them too much, it turns to poison. They need to have space. Right? Shravakas are voice hearers, which refers to the Buddha's immediate disciple, or students who depend on the teacher in order to benefit. The teacher's voice, the teacher's teachings. They're a little bit more reliant, right? They need more hands-on. That's the type of practitioner. Right? They need a teacher who's more hands-on. Bodhisattvas are those people driven by kindness and compassion. Yeah. And different than the first 2. The first 2, their focus is to be free from vexations, to transcend vexations, realize wisdom. Right? Compassion, it's okay. We can practice compassion. It's not the primary goal. Compassion, secondary. Right? Bodhisattvas, compassion is wisdom. Inseparable. Their understanding of wisdom is just compassion in action. Right? Through the liberative insight of selflessness, because of their personality types, they actually focus on the relationship with others. Right? And that's where they get a lot of energy. That's where they find the fuel for their practice. The ups and downs of life and the difficulties and so on. So, each of these types of people, they need different things. They need different things. And the ability to adapt to, self, we can substitute self with the teachings, right? The teachings, the other, the student, different types, right? And the context, the opportunities, what needs to be done, what can be done. Right? So if self is in the way, then you can't really see what's happening there. So 5 natures. The 5 natures. Also personality types, could be said. Right? Pratyeka Buddha, Shravaka, Bodhisattva, right? There's 2 other types. One is indeterminate. Indeterminate. They got a little bit of karmic affinity with Shravaka, Bodhisattva, Shravaka. They have a mixed bag of things, indeterminate. Now, what makes these natures, nature here means not true nature, but characteristics, how they are formed. How they are formed is how do people become the way they are? Of course, there's the element of genes and DNA and all that, but it is living in life, their experiences and their choices that have formatted them in a particular way. Same thing with Dharma practice. Right? If a person is always alone and choose not to practice with other people, they're creating karma that's like that. What kind of karma? The karma of them not meeting people. Right? The karma of them even not meeting teachers. The Pratyeka Buddha. The Pratyeka Buddha are self-awakened ones. So through their lifetimes and lifetimes of karmic action, providing imprints of their subtle mental continuum throughout different lives, format them into a particular way. In other words, we've done this to ourselves. Right? People that are dependent on teachers. So they have very strong affinity with teachers, and they rely on teachers, right? For self-liberation, right? Or bodhisattva. Our actions create imprints on our lives that shapes us into a particular type of people. It's very important to be aware of what kind of actions that we are engaging in, right? That will format into one of these 5 natures. The fourth one, indeterminate. They have a mixed bag of different karmic affinities, and it really depends on which one will ripen first. Depends on the teacher and their good fortune. The 5th type is called echantikas. Echantikas are people that not recognized by later Mahayana tradition, such as Chan, Zen tradition, but in early Buddhism and in early Mahayana, they recognize echantikas, which are people that no matter what they do, somehow they can't realize liberation. Right? The Buddha denied that in certain Mahayana texts. Right? That echantikas are, from a conventional perspective, seems like they're like that, but actually they still have karmic connections with liberation, with freedom. So these are the 5 different types. Right? So the point is, from the perspective of shining the spotlight on the Buddha, from the Buddha's perspective, equanimity. Right? From the perspective of others, right? Differences, uniqueness, and the Dharma must flow without obstructions, so that each and every person is able to receive the teachings that they exactly need. Not equally, in an egalitarian way, but uniquely, so that they can reach the fruit of the apple or berry. Right? Does that make sense? So that's the point. So taking that into our lives, the people in our lives, family and friends, colleagues, every one of them is unique. Every one of them bring their own history to the table. So in terms of the framework that I provided tonight, it's simplistic, but at least it's a beginning. Self, other, context. Which one you're shining the light on? Which one do they actually need? at this time. Right? And if the self is blocking, right? Self, relax, diminish that. How? Is it contaminated by vexations, by self-interest? What do I get out of it? Gaining, losing, having, lacking, right or wrong. There's nothing to do with what's going on here. So use this framework to navigate the complexity of life. So that when we're with, one thing I love about my teacher was, I met him when I was 11. He was like a kid when he was talking with me. He was like but when he's turned and spoke to an adult and his other students, he said what needed to be said. He's not always just a kid. Right? That would be strange. An old man acts like a kid, right? So to different circumstances, he's different. Right? You can't really pigeonhole him. Same thing. You can't pigeonhole someone who's awakened, right, into a particular format. Now, karma does play a role because every one of us is limited by our own history. So sometimes, even after awakening or awakenings, the person may still act a certain way, limited by their own history. But if that person continues to practice, then they will begin to transcend their own history. Not only transcend their history, they will begin to transcend their culture. They're no longer bound by the cultural norms, accepted norms of the society. Not that they can do whatever they want, but they become paradigm shifters. Right? When the whole culture is saying this is wrong, they actually can see through the veil of the cultural biases and steer out of that. Does that make sense? You know, we have historical figures who were like that. Right? Famous people who are like that. So they're not just products of their own personal history, products of their culture. Right? They're actually producers too. So the different level, depth of, you can say awakening, to use a Buddhist jargon, but just depth of freedom.